So the first thing that made me think something wasn't quite right was joint pain. So that was my first symptom that took me to the doctors. After my aching joints, the symptoms became low energy, and that became apathy, so a general lack of desire for life, really. And ultimately that became brain fog, and it was actually brain fog which was my worst symptom, and that was the one that led myself and Joanne, my wife, to deciding to seek further action. The brain fog was by far the worst symptom. The others, the joint pain, the lethargy, I could kind of push through and continue my everyday life, but the brain fog was sometimes an inability to form words. Joanne would notice often before me that something wasn't quite right, so she'd noticed that I retreated a little bit into my shell, and I became quite distant in the relationship, so I'd answer questions quite succinctly. That would often then become a conversation where she thought something was wrong with her, and I'd explain that actually it was me, but it would take me normally 2 or 3 days before I realised something was really going on, so she would definitely highlight it first. I knew as a physiotherapist that what I was experiencing wasn't musculoskeletal, so that led to blood tests that led on to a referral to endocrinology. I saw 3 endocrinologists who tried me on various different medications, but ultimately they decided that everything was normal, and one of them actually told me the symptoms I was experiencing were all in my head. That made me feel obviously quite frustrated and quite cross, because I knew my own body, and although I couldn't put my finger on exactly what was wrong, I knew something wasn't right. I talked for 58 minutes about how I felt like one of those old-fashioned toy robots, the ones you needed to wind up, and I felt like someone just needed to put the key in, wind me back up, because I just felt like I had no energy. And at the end of that consultation, he said, well, it's obvious, your testosterone is low. I said, well, why hasn't anyone else come across this before? And he said, well, we treat it differently in the private space than we do in the NHS.
What is the male menopause? It's the lowering of male hormones in the middle of male life and middle age. Then testosterone is the main hormone. Men will produce 7 grams of testosterone every day, and women about 0.3 of a gram, so that's the difference. But it's still that 0.3 of a gram is still very important. Generally speaking, it's early to mid-40s, okay? But the youngest patient I saw in going to the Andropause was 32. So it can happen. But there are other factors involved too. There's genetics, okay? There's how much stress you're under, there's how many drugs you take, there's how much exercise you do, okay? Whether you have any infections, whether you've got diabetes. All of these things are things themselves that can help to lower testosterone further.
Testosterone itself, most medical doctors will agree that you tend to see improvements within 3 to 6 weeks. However, what I found, and what a lot of our gentlemen find, is improvements much sooner than that, so 1 to 2 weeks. And it's at the moment unclear whether that could be placebo or whether it's actually dopamine, so the reward centre of the brain firing off because you're finally doing something to help yourself. Back then I was making pretty bad dietary choices, really geared around trying to give me a short-term boost. So I was drinking a lot of fizzy drinks, I was eating a lot of chocolate and sweet things, and using the sugar to boost me because I wasn't getting it naturally from my own hormones. The change in my nutrition was really the next step in my recovery, because once I put that into my life, all of the other symptoms melted away. So I went from feeling much older than I was, to feeling loads better with hormone therapy, to feeling the best I felt in years when we added in appropriate nourishment. 10 years ago, I was feeling older than my years, and the future looked quite bleak. Whereas today, I'm looking forward to the next 40, 50, 60 years, because my health is so much better than it was a decade ago. One of the most common questions we get asked here at Alphagenix is, how does it all work? Well, it's important to remember that testosterone isn't a magic bullet.